All right, Luke. So we got your mechanics lined up with Chris Sale on the top. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to just go through both you and Chris's mechanics, kind of compare the two. These mechanics are a little bit earlier in Chris's career. Um, his mechanics are a little bit different, but I think this is one of the better videos that I've found that really kind of gives the perspective of that we're looking for on the first base side with you and with Sale. So I'm going to let both these play at the exact same time, and then we're going to go through it, talk about them, and just kind of break down some things that I noticed between y'all and just kind of what our game plan is kind of going forward and what we're going to work on. Okay, so big thing to notate. Whenever we were talking about earlier, right, we talked about how this front knee and why we're placing our foot over here. But you might be asking yourself, well, Max, Chris Sale's doing that, right? Why is he able to do that versus why can't I? And it all is about this back knee here, right? I want you to take a look at your back knee and compare it to Chris Sale, right? Take a look at what Chris Sale does. Whenever he is getting into this back knee, notice he's not going back. He's still staying neutral. And just like you as a driver, his first movement for him. Now, the thing about Sale is he's not necessarily a driver and he's not necessarily an accelerator, right? For you, Luke, you are a bona fide accelerator, right? That is, for you, naturally what is going to produce the best maximum output. Chris Sale is a great example of both, right? For Chris Sale, he's using both. As you could tell, his first movement is just like how an accelerator is. But notice how he also brings everything down with him as well, right? So that is kind of the thing about pitchers, right? It's also not black and white, right? For you, it's pretty simplified. If you notice, you use a lot more gravity than a Max Scherzer or Roger Clemens who use straight power and take everything down to the ground here, right? So what I mean by this, when we take a look at Chris Sale's back knee, notice he stays neutral, right? That's what we want. Versus if you notice where your knee goes, right? Your knee, your first movement is coming back, right? Because in order to stabilize yourself, you have to bring forward your back knee and bring back your front knee. Versus if you watch Sale real quick, notice how that back leg does not go anywhere. The only place it goes is straight down the mound there, right? Notice whenever he lifts up, his first movement is down and going towards home plate, right? Versus for us, it's kind of we have to cross ourselves and then start, right? So that's why I wanted to get into that point of where we start with our front foot just a little bit in front of our back foot. That way, instead of coming out like this, we're able to just go straight up, all while going to home plate, right? And that's something that we made an adjustment on, and that you did really good of making that adjustment. So going into a little bit more in depth, right? So now I want you to take a look at your arm at the beginning right here and take a look at what Chris Sale's doing, right? Watch Chris Sale, right? He does drop his hands like this, and he starts low, and then notice he kicks back up here, right? So take a look. If I were to draw right here, this line between his shoulder and elbow, you'll notice his elbow is above his shoulder, which he makes this, aka what we like to call the power W, right? A lot of pitchers sometimes will do this, especially when they bring low and if they have a little bit of trouble or a tendency of their arm coming up late, right? And we notice, watch what Chris Sale does. His arm's coming up and he kicks back last second, right? He kicks up. That's how people are able to use the power W effectively, right? Most pitchers do not pitch in the power W. The reason why some pitchers can like Mark Pryor, for example, a former Chicago Cub, was he was able at the last second, just like how Chris Sale does, is to kick up and he's able to get back on track, right? If we notice with our arm real quick, right, take a look at where our arm is going. This is what I was talking about where for Chris Sale, for example, if I clear the screen real quick and I put it back on your arm, Chris Sale, his body is adapted to the fact that he's here, and then he kicks up, right? And he's in position, right? For us, our body's trying to kick up, kick up, kick up, kick up. It can't, so now it's got to go and push, right? By the way, Luke, really like the arm action. I've actually been watching this video a few times over and over again with your mechanics, and I just love the way your arm finishes and just looks good, man. Looks good. So that's why we want to get to the bear stance, right? We want to get to bear, which in a way, and I know that's not really drawn correctly, but just picture the bear that we were talking about, where we're going to be able to keep our elbow above our shoulder and stay up with our throw rather than trailing from behind, right? So that's one thing. Another thing what I want you to take a look at, and what we talked about at the end of the lesson, right? Take a look at this lead arm, right? We've talked about before, or rather we talked in today's lesson, that you feel like sometimes you swing your arm out, right? That you swing your arm this way. I want you to take a look at what Chris Sale does, right? So instead of Chris Sale trying to take it around, what he does is he keeps it straight all the way up until this point right here, and he actually continues to rise it, and from there, as soon as he gets that rise, he's going to replace, right? So for you, for example, Luke, take a look at what your glove does in contrast, right? So when it gets to here, what it does instead is it kind of lets itself sit right there, right? So for you, what's going to help, number one, is keeping this glove side closed right here, right? But also then taking your glove right here into your armpit, or the other way, how I like to teach people is taking your elbow into your rib cage right here, okay? So that's another thing that I want you to kind of take a look at. That's probably going to help you a lot with doing that. One thing about your footwork, I know we talked a little bit about footwork, but really, really good stuff here. You don't land on your heel, which is good. You land flat-footed, which we like. We also like the fact that there's a little bit of bend, right? One thing is I want you to take a look at Chris Sale. Chris Sale's front leg, right? Lands with a little bit of bend, and then he extends out, right? And we're trying to get extension, but we're getting extension too late. At this point, this is when our leg should get back to extension, right? And if you're wondering why we're doing that, right, I want you to think of a catapult real quick, right? So let's say this is our catapult right here, right? And in order to get enough to go over like this, right, we have to have this straight front. If, in contrast, I have, let's just say like this. Oh, sorry. If I have like this, for example, right, and this is my catapult, I'm not going to get much action because it's very hard for a bent over surface, right? Versus as a catapult, right, I have something, if there was a rubber band holding this catapult right here and I let it go, it's going to have something to go over with, right? And it's going to cause it to have velocity, right? Velocity, and it's also going to have launch angle. And for us, we want a downward launch angle, right? Which is where it comes into play of us finishing over top like that, right? So that's another thing that we'll continue to work on. There's a really easy drill for that. It's actually one that you could do in the gym, and it's a really great one. Finish-wise, I love where your chest is. Chest is over your front side. Looks great, just like Chris Sale there. With the hip, one thing I do want to show what you do versus Chris Sale. Take a look at his hip, right? If you notice, Chris Sale, and this is also, and the reason I mention this is because it also kind of goes, kind of piggybacking off of what I was talking about, this front leg, is because this hip is able to come up and over it too, right? Same thing for you, for example, what you'll notice is that your hip, instead of coming up, It's really instead going around, if that makes any sense. And we can also talk about that in the next lesson too, and really how it gets to that point and why it gets to that point and what we can do. A really good exercise to do for that, Luke, whenever you're throwing, is think like, so they call it Superman. Essentially what you do, as soon as you throw, you let go and you hold your stance of letting go out front and finishing over your front leg. And we can work on that next time too. It's a little bit of a harder drill, but it's a really great drill to kind of teach you what it's supposed to feel like. Number one, for your leg to straighten out properly, but also for your hip to kick up as well. So I know that's obviously a lot of information in that video that we talked about there, but that's just kind of the basic building block, I would like to say. And this is kind of a video you can always reference back and see what Chris Sale is doing, and seeing how it really relates to you. If you can tell, the reason that I compared you and Chris Sale is because y'all are very similar, both lengthy. You have this sidearm to low three-quarter delivery, and obviously y'all both have a very, very long arm delivery. So that's why I wanted to compare you to Chris Sale. I hope that makes sense. But otherwise, man, looking forward to working with you again, man. Great lesson today. And keep working, man.